Wyoming Territory, spring of 1876. The wind hit harder once you had nowhere to go. Perrie Blackwell stood on the edge of her father's porch, dress hem mudded from 2 miles of walking, suitcase scuffed from being thrown at her feet. Her mother stood just inside the doorway, mouth set like stone, refusing to look at her. Her father's words echoed in her ears like a slap. "You shamed this family, take your things and go." She had said no to the marriage, that was all. No to marrying a man 3 decades older who smelled like pipe smoke and greed. No to becoming someone's property to settle a land debt. And so, at 21, Perrie was cast out with nowhere to sleep and no family left to speak her name. She walked until her legs gave out. Dirt roads stretched behind her and the plains opened wide ahead. A single hawk circled in the sky. The sun was going down when she finally sank to her knees on the side of the trail, boots blistered, throat dry, and eyes burning. She did not cry. She bit her lip until she tasted blood instead. A horse slowed nearby. Hooves thudded against the dirt, then stopped a few paces away. She looked up, squinting through the light. He wore a long trail coat, dust on his shoulders, reins held loose in one hand. His face was sun-worn, strong-jawed, eyes steady beneath a brown hat. He leaned slightly forward in the saddle, concern written clear. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low, warm, not rushed. Perrie blinked. No, he dismounted fast, boots solid on the earth. He knelt beside her, not touching, just close enough to shield her from the wind. "I'm Hollis Keene," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you. You look like you could use some help." She searched his face for anything false. There was nothing there but quiet patience. "I am Perrie Blackwell," her voice cracked. "I have nowhere to go." He nodded once, like that was all he needed to hear. "Can you stand?" She pushed herself up, legs trembling. He caught her elbow gently, but let her do it herself. When she wobbled, he steadied her without making her feel small. "I have a wagon," he said. "I was heading back to my land. It's a few hours west. You can ride with me. I have food, blankets. You will be safe." She hesitated, then looked down the road. There was nothing behind her but shame. Nothing ahead but maybe, just maybe, a man who meant his kindness. She nodded. They rode in silence mostly. The wagon was simple but well kept, pulled by 2 strong mules. Hollis gave her a water skin and let her eat bread and dried apples from a small tin. She watched his hands on the reins, the way he glanced at her every so often, making sure she was all right without asking again. By the time the sun had vanished behind the hills, they reached a ranch tucked against the edge of a pine forest. The house was small, but it had a porch and smoke coming from the chimney. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Built it myself, been here 6 years." He helped her down, careful not to crowd her. "You can stay in the house." "I will sleep in the barn." "You do not have to, I want to," he said simply. That night, Perrie lay under a warm quilt in a clean bed, staring at the wooden ceiling while crickets sang outside. She was safe. For the first time in weeks, she did not feel like she was drowning. The days that followed were steady. Hollis gave her space, but not distance. He showed her where the well was, how to gather eggs, how to patch the fence. He never asked about her family, never looked at her like she was broken or fragile. "You are not afraid to have a woman here?" she asked one morning as they worked side by side, mending a saddle strap. "I am not afraid of much," he said. "Least of all kindness." She stopped stitching and looked at him. "Why are you doing this for me?" He met her eyes. "Because no one should be cast away for saying no." She felt something in her chest loosen. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. Wind tore through the trees and thunder cracked loud enough to shake the windows. Perrie stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the sky go dark. Hollis stepped outside and handed her a mug of coffee. "You are not used to storms?" he asked, "not ones that come without warning." "They never do," he said. "But they pass." She looked at him, the way his hair curled damp at the edges from the rain, the way his eyes kept finding hers like he was trying to read something there. That night, with the fire low and the wind howling, Perrie sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around her mug. Hollis sat across from her, quiet. "I can leave," she said. "If I am a burden, you are not," he said. "I do not want you to go." She felt her breath catch. Why? His hands were still, but his voice was clear. "Because this place has been quiet too long." You bring something into it I did not know I missed. Perrie looked at him, heart pounding. The clock ticked softly behind them. I do not know what comes next, she said. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You do not have to know today, just stay, she nodded. In the days that followed, she stayed close. They worked together, laughed a little more. He showed her how to ride bareback. She taught him how to cook a proper stew. One evening, he brushed a bit of hay from her cheek and left his hand there a second longer than needed. She did not pull away. One night, she stood near the barn as the sky turned pink. Hollis came up beside her, hands in his pockets. You look like you belong here, he said. I feel like I do, she whispered. He looked at her, then stepped closer, slow and steady. May I? He asked. She nodded. He kissed her, soft and sure. The world went quiet. Her fingers found the front of his shirt. His hand curled around her waist. When they pulled back, she was smiling. I do not want to leave, she said. He smiled too. Then do not. And just like that, Perrie Blackwell, once cast away, was home. By late May, the pine needles around the house had gone soft green, and the creek that cut through the north pasture ran fuller from snow melt up in the Absarokas. Perrie rose early now, her body learning the rhythm of land that asked for hands more than words. She mended shirts beside the stove, carried buckets from the spring, and once a week rode into town with Hollis for flour, nails, and whatever else they'd scribbled on a page he kept folded in his coat pocket. That morning they'd come back from town with a new spool of thread, a length of calico she'd chosen without needing to explain why, and a book Hollis had spotted on the shelf behind the clerk's desk. He'd bought it without saying a word, wrapped it in brown paper, and handed it to her once they were back in the wagon. Now, she sat on the porch swing he'd built last winter, knees drawn up beneath her skirt, reading aloud while he worked a rasp over the teeth of a handsaw nearby. She looked across the moor and knew the letter in her hand would change everything, she read. That's how it starts. Reckon that's a better beginning than most folks get, he said, not glancing up. She turned another page. You ever read anything like this? Not unless you count crop receipts or the back of a tobacco tin. She laughed, a sound that still surprised her when it came. You might like it. It's about a woman who walks away from the life she's told to live. Sounds familiar, he said, setting the rasp down. She closed the book slowly. Do you ever wonder what you gave up by staying here all these years? He looked out toward the fence line where a pair of crows hopped along the top rail. Sometimes, but wanting something else don't mean I was wrong to stay. This land's been good to me. I built something I could believe in, she nodded, eyes following his. Belief's not easy to hang on to. No, he said, but it's easier when someone else helps hold it up. Later that week, she found a rusted wash basin in the shed and hauled it behind the house. She scrubbed it clean, then filled it from the spring and waited for the sun to warm the water. Hollis watched her from the garden he'd started turning over, hands on his hips. You planning to make use of that? I am, she said, unpinning her braid. It's been long enough. He turned back to the soil with a quiet nod. She bathed behind the house with her back to the wind, gooseflesh rising as the water cooled. By the time she came inside, cheeks pink and hair damp, he was setting a tin plate on the table with slices of smoked venison and beans he'd stewed with onions. I hope I don't smell like rust, she said, settling across from him. You smell like rain, he said. That night, after the dishes were dried and the lamp turned low, she stood by the window and watched the stars come out over the ridge. Hollis sat nearby, sharpening his knife with slow, even strokes. I used to be afraid of the dark, she said. What changed? I stopped expecting it to mean danger. She turned then, leaning against the sill. You've never asked me what happened before. I figured you'd tell it when you were ready. She hesitated, then crossed the room and sat beside him, his knife paused mid-stroke. My father owed a man more than he could pay, she said. He thought marrying me off would settle it. I told him I wouldn't do it. He said I was selfish, that I was no longer his daughter. Hollis rested the knife in his lap. I'm sorry, she stared at her hands. I thought maybe I was selfish. For choosing myself, he shook his head. You did what was right, even if it cost you. She looked at him, eyes shining. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever stop feeling like I owe someone something. You don't owe me anything, he said. But I'd be grateful if you stayed. I want to. His hand brushed hers, fingers calloused but gentle. She didn't pull away. In early June, she began tending the garden while he rode fence lines. He returned one evening covered in pine pitch and carrying a broken saddle cinch. She took it from him without a word and sat by the fire, threading a thick needle with waxed cord. He watched her work, then leaned down and kissed the top of her head. She stilled, then looked up at him. "I wasn't sure if I should," he said. "I'm glad you did." The next morning, she stirred before dawn and slipped outside. A soft mist hung over the pasture. She walked barefoot through the dew-wet grass, letting the cold wake her fully. When she turned back, she saw him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with quiet contentment. "You always rise this early?" he asked. "Only when I've got something worth waking for." He stepped down the porch steps and crossed to her. She reached for his hand. They stood that way, barefoot in the grass, while the sun crept over the hills and the mist burned away. She had once been cast aside. Now she was chosen. By mid-June, the air held the dry crackle of coming summer, and the soil beneath Perrie's hands turned from soft to stubborn. She'd taken to planting rows of runner beans along the back fence, where the sun poured heavy in the mornings and the soil stayed warm well into dusk. Her arms had grown stronger, the skin along her fingers darkening with sun and earth, and her shoulder no longer ached after a day spent stooped. Hollis had started carving a new doorframe for the lean-to beside the barn. She found him there one morning, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands sure with the draw-knife. He looked up as she stepped into the shade. "Thought I'd fix that hinge before it comes off in someone's hand," he said, nodding toward the crooked doorway. "Someone meaning me," she said, brushing a curl from her brow. "You do open it more than I ever did." She leaned against the post, watching a pair of swallows dart through the rafters. "You always work ahead of the need. You learn to, living quiet, fixing things before they break tends to keep the quiet." She stepped closer, picking up a chisel from the bench. "I think I'd like to learn this, woodwork." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "It's not fast work. That's why I want it." They worked in tandem for the rest of the morning, him guiding her grip, her movements slow and deliberate. When she made a wrong cut, he showed her how to square it again without a word of frustration. By midday, her hands ached, but her chest felt light in the evenings now. After supper and before the first star blinked into being, they took to walking the edge of the pasture. Perrie carried a small leather pouch she'd stitched from scrap, collecting wild rose hips and the occasional arrowleaf balsam root when it bloomed low along the trail. Hollis moved beside her with his usual quiet steps, pointing out elk tracks or signs of fox dens without breaking the hush they walked within. One night, near the edge of the tree line, she stopped abruptly. "That's sage," she said, kneeling. Hollis crouched beside her, fingers brushing the leaves. "You know it by smell. My grandmother burned it in the hearth during storms, said it kept the bad from settling too close." He watched her fingers crush a leaf between her thumb and forefinger. "Do you believe that?" "I believe in remembering what protected you." Once early on, she'd asked him why he never kept a dog. He'd said they barked too much and didn't know when to listen. But now, as the days stretched longer, she noticed he paused more often, watched her more openly. When she sang while hanging laundry, he lingered near the well. When she read aloud in the evenings, his hands went still. One afternoon, she stood on the porch with a basket of eggs when a rider came up the road. He was young, barely older than Perrie, with a telegram folded beneath his saddle flap and a Colt pistol strapped to his thigh. Hollis stepped out to meet him, his posture shifting just enough that Perrie knew he was wary. "Keene?" the rider asked, voice clipped. Hollis nodded. "What's the message?" The rider passed over the telegram and waited while Hollis unfolded it, eyes scanning the page. "Trouble?" Perrie asked, stepping down beside him. He shook his head. "Just word from a neighbor up near the Gros Ventre. Says someone's been cutting fence and taking cattle again. You'll go, tomorrow, only for a day." He turned to her then, and something in his face softened. "I'll need to know you'll be safe here." She lifted her chin. "I've lived through worse than a night alone." He didn't try to argue, only reached for her hand and held it between his work-roughened palms. The next morning he left before the sky had fully lightened. She watched him ride out, coat flaring against the wind, and kept watch until even the dust had settled. Alone, she moved through the house with more purpose than fear. She boiled water for washing, swept the floor, then sat on the back step with a pile of mending and needle in hand. By sundown, she'd cleaned the stovepipe and fed the chickens, and when she lit the lamp, the house felt steady, not empty. That night, she woke to the sound of hooves. For a moment, still caught in sleep's grip, her heart kicked up. Then she saw the outline of his hat through the window and breathed out slow. He didn't speak as he stepped inside, only set his rifle near the door and crossed the room to where she stood barefoot in her nightdress. Lamp light pooled around her. His eyes met hers, and something in them flickered with quiet relief. "You're back," she said. He touched her cheek just once, then let his hand fall. "There's coffee," she added, already reaching for the kettle, but he caught her wrist gently. "No need." "I just wanted to see you first." She held his gaze, then leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his chest. His arms came around her, warm and certain. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind stirred the branches, and somewhere near the ridge, a nightbird called. In the stillness, Perrie knew something had shifted. Not with thunder or suddenness, but like a seed taking root. Quiet, unseen, and certain. By the second week of July, the days stretched long and dry, dust curling from beneath hooves and boots alike. The mountains to the west shimmered beneath heat haze, and the scent of pitch hung in the air. Perrie began rising before dawn to work the garden before the sun came full. Hollis had taken to repairing the north troughs during the heat, sleeves rolled high, hat low over his brow. One morning she found him by the barn, hammering new slats into the upper loft wall. She stood at the ladder's base, shielding her eyes. "You ever think about widening the lean-to?" she asked. He paused, looking down at her. "You got something in mind?" "I was thinking it might serve as a place to keep drying herbs. If I had more room, I could hang bundles proper, keep them from molding." He glanced at the beams. "Could reinforce the joists, run a new frame off the side." "Might take a few days. I could draw it out," she offered. "Measure it so we don't waste lumber. You know how to do that. I watched my uncle build a granary once. Took notes when no one was looking." He stepped down from the ladder, wiping his hands on a cloth he kept in his belt. "Show me what you've got in mind after supper." That evening, she laid out rough sketches on the kitchen table, charcoal lines smudged slightly from her palm. Hollis studied them, nodding occasionally. "You've got the load angles right," he said, tracing a finger down one edge. "You ever put hammer to nail yourself?" "Not yet, but I've watched your hands enough to know which end's which." He chuckled, then tapped the corner of her drawing. "You draw like someone who's had to prove things twice." She looked up from the page. "Most men don't expect a woman to know how to measure pitch or square a frame." "I'm not most men," she smiled faintly. "No, you're not." They started the frame the next morning. She held the posts while he braced them, learning the rhythm of his pace, measured, deliberate, precise. When she misjudged the angle of a plank, he showed her how to correct it without raising his voice or reaching to fix it for her. He handed her a saw, not as a gesture, but as if he expected the cut to be hers to make. By midday, sweat trickled down her spine and her arms ached, but she didn't stop. He passed her a canteen without a word, and they sat in the shade of the barn, shoulder to shoulder, watching swallows skim over the field. "You ever think about bringing cattle in again?" she asked. He leaned back against the post. "I'd need more fencing." "And a second set of hands." She turned her head slightly. "Maybe you've got them now." He met her gaze, quiet settling between them. No need to name what already stood in place. That night, a letter arrived. It came by a trader's cart from the south, addressed in careful script. Perrie opened it on the porch, knees drawn up beneath her, the sun just beginning to dip. Hollis worked at the far end of the pasture, but she felt his attention shift the moment she stilled. She read it through once, then again, slower. When he returned, she was still holding it. "Everything all right?" he asked, setting his gloves on the rail. "It's from my cousin," she said. "Clara, she heard what happened. Said my father told people I ran off with a drifter." Hollis didn't interrupt, only waited. She wanted me to know she never believed it. "Said if I ever needed a place, her door was open." He leaned against the post beside her. "You thinking of going?" She folded the paper. "No, but I think I needed to hear it just the same." He nodded once, slow. "Reckon truth makes the ground settle under your feet." She looked toward the hills, shadows stretching long. "I still carry the anger, some days heavy, some days hollow, but it's quieter now. You don't have to rush it out of you. I'm not. I'm just letting it stop being the loudest thing in me." He studied her face in the half-light, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've grown into this place fast. I think I was always meant for it," she said. "Just never knew the shape of it till I got here." They stood in the hush of dusk, the porch creaking beneath their weight, a coyote's cry lifting faint from the ridgeline. When she turned to him, the last of the sun caught in his eyes. "I never thought I'd trust a man again," she said carefully. "But you don't ask for that, you earn it." He stepped closer, not rushed. "I've never wanted to be anything I had to convince someone of, just something they could lean against." She rested her palm against his chest, over the steady beat there. "You are." That night, she lit only one lamp in the house. They moved through the space like something already known, no hesitation, no need to speak what had already been understood in the quiet of shared labor and long looks. When the wind rose through the eaves, he pulled the quilt higher over her back, his hand curving warm against the small of her spine. She didn't dream of what came before. And when the rooster called out before the light, they rose together, not as two people passing through each other's lives, but as something built like beams set true, each one bracing the other. By August, the lean-to stood finished, new beams sanded smooth, a slatted wall built to catch breeze but keep out the worst of the sun. Perrie had hung bunches of yarrow and wild mint along the rafters, the air thick with their scent. Hollis added a latch to the outer door and didn't say a word when she started keeping her ledger on a shelf she'd carved herself. They sat outside most evenings now, after the supper plates were scraped clean, watching the far ridge turn violet. It was during one of those silences, the kind that had grown familiar and easy between them, that she spoke. "The land grant law, do you still hold title to all of it?" He turned his head slightly, not surprised, just curious. "Every acre I've claimed is in the ledger at the courthouse." "Why?" "I was thinking about the hill beyond the creek. It's mostly dry grass and stone, but there's a slope near the bottom that holds moisture. Could be cleared for another garden bed or even a few goats. You want goats now? I want to use what's here." "Make more of it." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You thinking of staying for good?" She didn't look away. "I'm not thinking of anything else." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the motion slow. "Then we ought to put your name on that land too." She didn't answer right away, only stood and walked a few steps toward the fence, her skirt catching in the breeze. "You do that?" "I would," he said. "It's yours as much as mine." The next week they rode into town together. She wore her second-best dress, the one with the faded lilac hem, and Hollis had shaved, despite muttering about it. They stepped into the land clerk's office just after noon. The man behind the desk looked up and blinked when Hollis handed over the form. "You two looking to split the deed?" "No," Hollis replied. "We're looking to hold it together." The clerk nodded, then reached for a pen. Outside, the sun beat down hard. Perrie rested her hand on Hollis's arm, not for balance, not for show, just because it felt right. He glanced at her, his hand covering hers for a moment. On the ride back, they didn't talk much. The wind carried the scent of cut hay, and somewhere in the distance, someone fired a rifle, the sound no more than a snap in the air. That night, after the lantern was turned down low and the fire burned to coals, Perrie took the folded deed from her satchel and placed it in the drawer beside the bed. She turned to find Hollis already lying back, one arm tucked behind his head. "You ever think it'd turn out like this?" she asked, sitting beside him. He reached up and pulled her down gently until her head rested against his chest. "Not like this, not this good." She listened to his breath, steady and slow. "I didn't know a place could feel like someone." He shifted, just enough to kiss her hair. "You're not just here, Perrie, you're home." In the weeks that followed, they didn't change much of their rhythm. She still rose early and walked the perimeter of the garden barefoot, still noted which herbs were drying fastest, still tracked the hens laying patterns in a worn notebook. Holly spent more time by the south fence, mending a gate that had started to lean from years of wind. One warm afternoon, she returned from the creek with a bucket of water and paused when she saw a stranger at the edge of the yard. He was older, with the look of someone who'd traveled, long coat dusty, hat faded, a rifle slung across his back. Holly stepped out from the barn, a hammer in his hand but held low. "Looking for something?" he asked. The man tipped his hat. "I passed through Elk Hollow, heard someone put a woman's name on a deed out this way, just wanted to see it was true." Perrie stepped forward, chin lifted. "It's true." The man looked at her, then at Holly's, then turned his horse without a word and rode off. She watched until he was gone, then turned to Holly's. "You think he'll talk? Let him," Holly said. "We're not hiding." That night, she wrote a letter back to Clara. She didn't speak of what had happened, only described the way the light fell on the ridge at dusk, the taste of the late summer peaches, the way Holly's had built her a new bench for the lean-to, just the right height for sorting herbs. She signed it with her full name, Perrie Blackwell Keene. One morning, a month later, she stepped from the porch to find Holly's in the yard, holding a tin ring in his palm. It was simple, unworked, the metal dulled from age. "It was my ma's," he said. "Found it buried in a box of old tools. I'd thought it was lost." She took it carefully, turning it over in her hand. "It's good. I've got no preacher," he added. "No church out here, but I've got a field full of wildflowers and a coat that still fits." "That enough?" "It's more than enough." They stood in a circle of stones behind the barn, the sun warm against their faces, the air humming with bees. He took her hand, slipped the ring on her finger, and said, "I'll walk this land beside you day in and day out, long as breath stays in me." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I'll plant roots here in you and in this place, and I won't ever leave." They kissed slow and sure, and the breeze picked up the hem of her skirt and carried the scent of mint and pine through the air around them. Years passed. The goats came, just two of them, ornery but loved. The garden expanded, and she taught others in town about tinctures and drying methods. Holly's built a second shed near the back pasture, and when the first snow fell one winter, they stacked firewood together in quiet harmony. They grew older, but not apart. On warm evenings, they still sat on the porch, side by side, her hand in his, watching the sky turn. And sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, she would lean her head on his shoulder and whisper, "Still good," and he'd nod, voice steady as ever. Always.